Kel-Tec PMR-30 versus the Smith Wesson M&P 22 Magnum. Let's check it out. Kel-Tec introduced the PMR-30 back in 2010, and so for the past 13 years, it's really been the main 22 Magnum semi-automatic pistol on the market. AMT made their Auto Mag a number of years ago. It didn't do so well. And then Smith Wesson introduced their M&P 22 Magnum. And it really gave the Kel-Tec a head-to-head competitor. Both had the same round capacity, and both again shoot that 22 Magnum, which just gives you about twice the power as 22 long rifle. We've done a full review on both of these, but we're going to get into a comparison. And guys, if you're looking for a 22 Magnum, which I just tell you, it's a lot of fun. These are two great options. All right, guys, we have the Kel-Tec PMR-30, the Smith Wesson M&P 22 Magnum. Both have a 30 round mag capacity. Now, before we get started, these are 25 round mags that we have blocked, and that's because YouTube does not allow for 30 round and above magazines. So just want to make that disclaimer. But this is an incredible amount of firepower. I mean, in a small, fairly small package. These are, full size, but they're very thin handguns. One of the big things, though, about 22 Magnum, before we get into the comparison, is that it's a great round for those who are recoil sensitive, who have little shooting experience. It's easy to rack the slide. The recoil is very mild. And yet, 22 Magnum makes an effective self-defense round. Is it the best? No, there are other options out there, but it gives you 60% increase in ballistics over a 22 long rifle. And that is saying something, because 22 long rifle is lethal. And so this just gives you a lot more energy, plus the 30+1 rounds give you a lot of capacity. So while Kel-Tec came out in 2010, and then Smith Wesson came out in 2023. So for the past 13 years, Kel-Tec has kind of reigned supreme in the 22 Magnum realm. One thing, though, is that Walther has introduced their WMP. Now, this is a 15 round magazine. It's a little bit larger, a little bit heavier pistol, more based on the original PPQ design. A great handgun. And so it just gives us more options, and I think we may be seeing some more coming down the pipe. But guys, the recoil on these are just so mild, and that's one of the big appeals. But we've done reviews on both of these handguns. I'm going to have them annotated if you want to watch the full review. But we're going to mainly focus on the comparison between the two. First thing we want to do is drop our magazines, and again, it's a 30 round magazine. And then we have our Kel-Tec, which has a heel type mag release, a little bit different. And this gun is empty as well. Now with the Smith Wesson, we have your standard mag release, and it is reversible to the other side. So that is one of the differences. This is, of course, Smith Wesson, which they came out with their 5.7, which has been very popular. And it has the tempo barrel recoiling system, which is a rotating barrel system. But on the 22 Magnum, it is a delayed blowback action. And we're going to take a look at that when we disassemble it. But it is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool system. It really tames the recoil. In fact, the first time I shot the M&P 22 Mag, I wasn't sure I'd fired the round. I mean, it was just such a soft shooting gun. But with the Kel-Tec, it's a very soft shooting gun as well. Very little recoil. And again, you've just got that massive capacity. Now with the Smith Wesson, we have more of a textured grip. And it goes all the way around the grip, It is a very thin grip, but with 22 Magnum, it has to be a fairly long grip in this direction. And that just has to do with the length of the round. Of course, it's the same with the Kel-Tec. Thin, and yet it's a little bit thicker. To be honest, it reminds me a lot of the 1911. This has a little more of a hump, whereas the Smith & Wesson is a little bit more straight in line. One thing you'll notice though is the base plate of the magazine hangs out a little bit on the Smith & Wesson. And it does add about 3/4 of an inch to the grip, but yet again, same round capacity. Also, one thing that's big about the Smith is that it is a stainless steel slide with the Armonite finish. With the Kel-Tec, we have a steel slide here with barrel, but then we have a polymer section at the rear of the slide. Now the metal does come back to about right here, and so it is attached to the metal, but that is a very different kind of design. With the Smith & Wesson, we have these scallops that are directional and very easy to pull back. On the Kel-Tec, this is reminiscent of the Beretta APX 0. It has those kind of lines that come up and it kind of stands out a little bit, but yet it's a very thin slide. And so this just gives you a little bit of grab right here. It's non-metal and it has a totally different feel to it, but they are easy to rack. Also, we have ambidextrous frame safeties on both pistols. But Smith & Wesson is known for offering that frame safety with the original pistols and then coming out with a non-frame safety version. But they haven't at this point. Both have Picatinny rails at the front. The Kel-Tec's a little bit longer. It does have 5 slots where the Smith & Wesson has 4. Also the trigger guard, rounded off on the Smith. On the Kel-Tec, it actually comes out and there's a screw. Now, one of the things about the Kel-Tec, it is a 2-piece polymer system. And so this fits together with these different screws. With the Smith & Wesson, it is a solid frame, just like all of your other polymer frame pistols. But one of the things about the Kel-Tec is that these screws are Loctited in, and I've not heard any reports of these coming loose. But if you do have any, you want to just make sure you have them Loctited. And they go all the way around the frame. But one big plus for the Smith & Wesson is it does have the optics ready cuts. And then here on the Kel-Tec, it does not. These are the screws that are inside the slide section. And so this is optics ready, the Kel-Tec is not. But one thing you will notice is that both have a green fiber optic rod at the front sight, and here at the rear, we have an orange fiber optic on the Kel-Tec, and then a black, just blacked out version on the Smith & Wesson. It still gives them very good sight pictures because of the front fiber optic rod. The grip on the Smith & Wesson, the texturing is very well done. It gives you a lot of texture, gives you a good solid feel when you're gripping the handgun. With the Kel-Tec, we have these squares, but it's not as solid of a grip. It feels a little bit loose, mainly because of just the aggressive texturing here. But definitely because of 22 Magnum, that's not really a problem. But it's also slick on both the front and back straps of the gun. But again, there is no movement. Now the polymer frame itself has just a touch of a bite to it. And so it definitely feels good, but with the Smith & Wesson, you really feel like you've got this a solid, confident grip. And with the hill type mag release, there's some ridges back here. Makes it really easy to grab, but it does not pop the magazine out. You have to actually pull it out. With the Smith & Wesson, again, it's that standard, and you can switch it to the other side. But it does jettison the magazines out just a little bit. It pops them out. And so that is a difference between these two. But again, the magazine does come out about 3/4 of an inch. And I would say that the Kel-Tec is a little bit longer in this area from front to back, whereas the Smith & Wesson is just a touch thinner. But if you're really into frame safeties, the frame safety on the Smith is a little less obtrusive, and yet the Kel-Tec is a little more aggressive with the frame safety. So it's really easy to bring up, and it's a larger lever. When it comes to the slide stops, you can see how far back it is on the Kel-Tec, and there's just a small ledge right here. With the Smith & Wesson, we do have serrations right here. Now the barrel length on the Kel-Tec PMR-30 is 4.3 inches. When it comes to the Smith & Wesson, it's 4.35 inches. So it's not much of a difference, very little. Again, these are pretty comparable as far as length. The big deal is here at the bottom. And with the Kel-Tec PMR-30, the bore axis is fairly low. In fact, when I did the review, I mentioned that. But with the Smith Wesson M&P 22 Magnum, it is super low. This is just a really low bore axis. And one of the things though about it is because the recoil is so mild and the slides are fairly light, it doesn't matter as much as a standard centerfire caliber. But it's funny, it's thicker in this area than it is the Kel-Tec. These are both hammer fired, and it has a larger hammer in the Kel-Tec, smaller hammer in the Smith & Wesson. Weight on the Kel-Tec PMR-30, 15.4 ounces. Smith & Wesson 22 Magnum, 22.13 ounces. So it's really considerably heavier. Weight on the Walther WMP, 27.14 ounces. This is the heaviest of the bunch. Triggers are a little bit different. We have a curved trigger on the Kel-Tec. We have a flat face trigger on the Smith & Wesson. We do have a little bit of that trigger blade safety at the front. Here we do not. But we do have a trigger stop here at the back. As far as the trigger action, tiny bit of take up right here. And then it hits a wall and it's a nice crisp break. There's just a little bit of resistance right before you hit the brake. With the Smith & Wesson, we have our take up right here, a little more take up, and then we have a very crisp brake. I would say that the Smith & Wesson brake is more crisp than the Kel-Tec, but still two great triggers. Trigger pull weight with our Lyman trigger gauge with the Smith & Wesson. 3 pounds, 7.8 ounces. With the Kel-Tec, 2 pounds, 4.5 ounces. And it's coming in at around the 2 to 2.5 pound mark. So we have a lighter trigger pull with the Kel-Tec, but we have a better brake on the Smith & Wesson. We're using Fiocchi 40 grain. This is jacketed hollow points, and it's going 1,910 feet per second. And we really appreciate Fiocchi for sponsoring today's ammunition. All made in the USA, one of the biggest suppliers of ammunition in the country. Smith & Wesson magazine's a little bit easier to load, has a channel that just allows you just to put it in and then it lines up the rounds. With the Kel-Tec mag, you have to make sure that you load in the round with the rim against the rim in the back. It's a little harder to load, but it fits in there pretty well. All right guys, we got up out to the range. We've done quite a bit of shooting with them. I'll tell you guys, the Smith & Wesson, the recoil is just unbelievably low. It's low on the Kel-Tec, but man, that tempo barrel system makes a massive difference. And so I'm gonna just shoot a couple side by side. We're gonna see how, see if we can demonstrate it a little bit. That front sight barely moves. I mean, it is very shallow. And then when it comes to the Kel-Tec, just gonna shoot off about 5 rounds. There's not a lot of sight movement difference, but you can feel it in your hand. There's definitely a difference with the recoil. Again, 22 Magnum is so soft to shoot already, but when you bring out that Smith & Wesson, I mean, it really makes a huge difference in the way this thing handles. The grips, texturing on the Smith & Wesson is better. There's not a lot of slippage with the Kel-Tec. I mean, it's a good feeling gun. It could use a little more texturing, but I don't think it really affects the overall performance. The sights are definitely a big plus for the Kel-Tec. These things shine like crazy. But the fiber optic on the Smith & Wesson also does well. Shooting it one hand. Noticeable difference between the two. Thinking back on it, I just remember how soft the Kel-Tec was when you shot it. I mean, it's just low recoil. Smith & Wesson, I mean, they've gone above and beyond. This system is really impressive. But honestly, aside from that, I mean, these have both been very reliable with the Fiocchi 40 grain today. We haven't had any issues. They're both great guns. You're just going to get a little better performance. And guys, honestly, there's a little bit of a price jump with the Smith, and that's really going to be your deciding factor. Is it worth the super low recoil compared to just the low recoil. These are crazy. Now we've done full reviews on both of these pistols and the disassembly, but it's really important to look to see the difference. So we're gonna go ahead and drop our magazine, check the chambers again. And you know, the one thing is the recoil system is what makes these two so different. With the Kel-Tec PMR-30, we have a pin right here. It's mushroomed out on the other side. So you push it through on this side and it just comes straight out. You don't have to manipulate the slide at all. And you'll notice that little groove in that pin. And then your slide just comes right off the frame. With the recoil spring, you've got to take a screwdriver to take off the tension of that spring and then just lift it up and it comes right out. You'll also notice this little buffer. And this just fits in here. It's just going to cushion everything, but these need to be replaced, you know, on a regular basis. I think that Imp Carbo makes a really durable buffer that lasts a little bit longer, but it's good to have some of these available. And then we take our barrel and we push it forward. Now you're looking for these little slots, and once you get it here, you can just pull off your locking block. And then the barrel comes right out the back, just like that. With the Smith & Wesson, we have our takedown pin, and you're going to push out here. But before, you've got to bring back this little crescent in the slide to the front of your slide stop. And you just want to make sure that it's lined up, and then you take your pin and you go right here to that slide stop and you just push it through. And that brings out this part of the slide stop. And then we can again just bring our slide right over. You don't have to pull the trigger on either one. And then we have our recoil spring right here. It is captive, and then we have our barrel. Now this is where it gets really different. This is the Tempo barrel system, and so we have a sleeve and we have the barrel that's nestled in there, and you'll see all these little gas checks. And what that does is when the gun fires, it delays the action. It just pops the barrel back before it unlocks. And so that really softens the recoil. With the 5.7, it actually rotates, but with the 22 Magnum, it just delays it and brings it back. In fact, if you look with it in the frame, the barrel just comes back this far, and then it locks back. With the Smith & Wesson, we have a small hammer. With the Kel-Tec, we have a larger hammer. So both of these are hammer fired. You can get a bird's eye view of the internal parts of the frame. Now with the Kel-Tec, you'll notice that the slide comes back into the polymer housing. And then we have this cavity right here that allows for the hammer to function. With the Smith & Wesson, it's a smaller cavity, but it's a smaller hammer. And again, this is a stainless steel section. And then we have the barrel sleeve, the barrel, and then with the guide rods. They're definitely a little thicker with the Smith & Wesson than the double coiled recoil spring of the Kel-Tec. The barrels are definitely different. And of course, with the Smith & Wesson, with the Tempo barrel system, it just gives it a whole different look. So while they're 22 Magnum, they're both totally different with design. For reassembly, we're going to drop in our Tempo barrel into the barrel sleeve. It only goes in one way. Drop in your barrel. You have a little nub at the end right here that fits at the back of the barrel, so we're going to put the front section in. The red goes toward the back. Bring your slide over your frame. You want to make sure you get those rear slide rails. Bring it to the little notch, drop it in, and it closes. And it's really simple. Now with the Kel-Tec, you bring your barrel in and you go ahead and bring it all the way up to the front. You look at these two cutouts on either side, and then you take your locking lug and with this flat surface toward the back of the slide, just drop it in and then you bring it back. Take your buffer with these little ears at the bottom, and we're going to set them into the slide, and then we put in our recoil spring. Just like that, and it slips into place. Take your slide. Now if you want a little more detail with the reassembly, you can go to the full review, but pretty much it's very simple. And we're back in business. As far as price, the Kel-Tec PMR-30 runs $495 full retail. The Smith & Wesson is $649. So there's about a $150 difference between the two. As far as pros and cons, you do get optics ready. You get more texturing on the Smith & Wesson. It is longer on the grip than the Kel-Tec. Of course, you have this polymer piece at the top on your slide. With the Smith & Wesson, it's all stainless steel. And you have the tempo barrel recoiling system. Flat face trigger, very nice trigger. A little more weight than your Kel-Tec, but definitely a little bit more crisp break. I like the sights on the Kel-Tec, the fiber optic at the back and the front, and of course with the Smith & Wesson, just a front fiber optic with a black outline at the back. Serrations on the Smith & Wesson are more traditional and they are directional. Here with the Kel-Tec, it just has those larger lines, but yet it's easy to grab. Overall, these are two excellent guns, and you know, it's just a matter of choice. I think you're going to pay a little more for the amenities of the Smith, but even with the PMR, I mean, it is a great shooting little gun. The big thing is to find the ammo that works best for you. The Fiocchi 40 grain worked great, the Federal 40 grain, and the CCIs. When we went to the 35 grain, we had issues. So you want to keep that in mind when you are buying ammo for these. The Kel-Tec does come in a number of colors, which is of course black, the OD, the desert tan, and also a gray color. And I've even seen them in blue. So Smith & Wesson may come out with an FTE color, we'll just see. And then M-Carbo makes a ton of upgraded parts for your handgun. In fact, there's a whole kit to almost completely change the PMR-30, and it runs about half the price of the gun. But overall, two great options. And of course, don't forget the Walther W&P. Yes, it's 15 round mag capacity, but man, it is a really quality handgun. So the Kel-Tec PMR-30 or the Smith & Wesson M&P 22 Magnum. Two fantastic guns, totally different in design in a lot of aspects, and yet very similar in the fun factor. These are a blast to shoot. And great for plinking, great for hunting, great for taking first-time shooters out, but also as a self-defense option, gives you a lot of rounds. And a big thank you to GunZoneDeals for sending the PMR-30 and to Smith & Wesson for sending the M&P 22 Magnum. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America, long live the Republic. Also had a few issues as well. Okay, I'm gonna get into that. Kel-Tec PMR 22 Magnum. Then Smith & with the 22 with the 5. Okay. So guys, the 22 Magnum. Okay. So guys, the PMR-30. Okay. So guys, the 22. Okay. Now the Kel-Tec is soft shooting, but when it comes to just incredibly take to the range, and you'll just have a lot of fun.